This week's episode of the Pocketnow Weekly brought to you by Stitcher Premium. Hey, listeners, if you haven't joined Stitcher Premium yet, now's the perfect time. Stitcher Premium gets you completely ad-free episodes of hundreds of shows like Comedy Bang Bang, WTF with Mark Maron, and How Did This Get Made? You also get 21,000 hours of exclusive content. New exclusive originals like Marvel's Wolverine and Issa Rae's Fruit are launching every week for Stitcher Premium members. If you love podcasts, you are missing out. When you listen to ad-free episodes in Stitcher Premium, your favorite podcasters get paid. Help support your favorite shows and join Stitcher Premium today. For a free month of listening, go to StitcherPremium.com and use promo code POCKET. Again, StitcherPremium.com, promo code POCKET, and we thank them for supporting the PN Weekly. And we are live. The LG G7 ThinQ is finally a real thing that people can poke with their fingers. The ups and downs of launching a phone has LG ironed out their issues, here rejoining the flagship phone market. Also, Verizon and Samsung strike a deal on including more value-added software on Galaxy handsets. Xiaomi had a big news week launching their IPO, and we hash out the potential consumer pitfalls looking at the Sprint and T-Mobile merger. We've got a lot to talk about, so make sure you are charged and ready for episode 303 of the Pocketnow Weekly. May the 4th be with you. Recorded a little bit earlier, 10:35 in the Pacific time. This weekly podcast is where we dissect and discuss those gadgets that make our lives mobile. Smartphones, tablets, and wearables. It's all the stuff you wished existed when you were a kid, and pop culture puns didn't have quite enough power to become full-blown social media holidays. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, contributing editor at Pocketnow.com, joined as always by plucky podcast producer, Mr. Jules Wong on the East Coast. How's it going, sir?
All the power to y'all for celebrating Disney at its best and at its most profitable. So I'm very happy for you.
And you may be noticing if you're watching the live stream, or you might not be noticing if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast. We're joined by a third this week, Mr. Nick Gray. How's it going, sir?
It is going excellent. I can't complain.
Well, yeah, you can't, because Disney's listening. That's going to be, I think, the theme for everything. We had a little conversation off air just before we got started. Like, I don't know if you guys caught this. It's just the little pop culture reference, but the Star Wars congratulating Marvel tweet, you know, passing the lightsaber from Rey's hand to Iron Man's glove. Just good job, Disney, on breaking the box office sales that Disney created. Disney. Well, so good.
The metaphor doesn't have to revolve around the lightsaber. And also, like, your Star Wars begat Infinity Wars, like, is our best pieces of media, do they revolve around wars? Like, is this something of conflict that is just
always?
Oh, well, here's $5. Go and see a Star War. All right, we should probably jump in. We actually do have a really heavy news week this week, and some big gadget news again. From all of the early indecision of LG at the beginning of the year, will they, won't they? The tease of whether or not they were going to join the smartphone flagship market this year. We finally have a device from them at sort of an odd time, but we should probably jump in, kind of run down through some of our headlines. And Jules, how should people get in touch with us if they also want to join the conversation?
Yeah, indeed. If you want to get in touch with us and talk with us while we're broadcasting live at 1:30 on the East Coast, 4th of May, you can tune in via Twitter with the hashtag PN Weekly, writing your comments, your questions, and whatever, especially as we talk about some of the new items up for grabs here, the LG G7 being one of them. And if you can't make it here live, if you can't write in immediately, then you can do so on email. We check the mailbag every end of the month, and the address to send all your queries to is podcast@pocketnow.com.
Gorgeous.
Yes,
good
indeed.
Deal. All right, so we had a number of headlines. We have some hands-on content to take a look at. LG G7 ThinQ, more screen, more AI. Jules, what are we taking a look at with this phone?
Standard 2018 kind of thing going on with the Android flagships. Snapdragon 845, 4 gigs of RAM. Unfortunately, that's the only thing that we get here, the only SKU in the US, because 6 gigs of RAM is available, but only in certain countries. Korea. We also have a couple of specific features to this phone. So we have the display. Well, first of all, the display technology, which is the super bright display, basically adds a white pixel to the RGBW subpixel structure that's said to get up to 1,000 nits, which is pretty impressive. And we'll talk about more about the display technology debate that's going on here in just a moment. There's also a whole bunch of conversation about the notch and chin that has been played out over and over again. One thing that has really put the mass of this phone, or whatever you consider dead space of this phone, to use is the boombox speakers. They say that LG says that it has a 10 times larger than usual resonance chamber within the device, and that provides for a net effect of about 6 decibels when you're playing out from those front-facing speakers, which all in all is a good thing. You're stealing that from HTC Boom Sound. That's very nice. The display also is taller than usual. Instead of 2x1 or 18x9, you're now adding 1.5 points to that thing, which I don't know. It eventually will have lightsabers in our hands that
definitely felt like the arms race against Samsung. It's, if you're 18.5 by 9, we'll be 19.5 by 9. We hate reducing fractions at LG, where it should be a 2x1 display.
They're just trying to make things more complicated.
I think it's like 13 by 6 though. So I mean, if you want to do that unsexy thing, audio too. Audio. We are talking about quad DACs that's carried over from the V series and 7.1 surround sound. So that's pretty special. Of course, you got the standard waterproofing and dust proofing and drop proofing, also from the V series V30, and just a whole bunch of stuff. I will note that as we've pointed out before, dual camera system. LG likes to use this wide general telephone, or like a angle camera, and then there's the wider angle camera. And we've seen that drop in the field of view. The G5 had its widest at 135 degrees. The G6 went down to 120. But all the while, we saw the resolution increase from 5 megapixels to 8 megapixels, 13 megapixels on the V. And now we're seeing equal parity, 60 megapixels on the main camera, 60 megapixels on the wide angle sensor, but at a field of view of only 107 degrees. So plenty to talk about here. I want to start off with just your first assessments here, Nick, and tell me more of just your impression so far.
My impressions, now to caveat this, I have not touched the phone, I have not used the phone, but yeah. I am honestly just underwhelmed by it all. And a lot of it goes back to just the phone's design in general. I mean, when you look at LG, what they've done over the years, they started to move in a different direction and then came a little bit further back last year with the G6. And now I look at the phone and I think it's one of their mid-range devices. It doesn't scream, hi, I'm a high-tech flagship device that you should buy me. When you compare that to a Samsung phone or the latest Huawei phone, it just doesn't scream, this is the phone that you need to buy.
And Juan Carlos, I mean, well, here's the thing: the Pocketnow, we had 2 people sent out to the events that LG has held. One of them, our editor-in-chief, Anton Dinaj, was in Korea for the big tour that LG gave the whole press corps to, and then there was Jaime Rivera at the New York launch event itself, doing our hands-on video from there. So lots of depth that they could give, but just from an external point, because I think they've talked themselves out this week. What are your general impressions here?
Well, this is a tough marketplace for LG. I kind of got the feeling like 2017 marked a more radical change in terms of screen aspect ratios. So that felt like we were getting fresher devices, even though the overall usage for most manufacturers didn't change substantially from 2016 to 2017. We got longer screens. Now I think every manufacturer is refining what a longer, taller smartphone should feel like. So, I mean, to Nick's point, I mean, I kind of agree, but I kind of agree across the board with most manufacturers. A Galaxy S9 feels like a refined Galaxy S8, not like some fresh, new, aggressive take on on how we should use our smartphones. And I think LG, again, battling from this underdog position, is facing some of those same challenges. How do you make noise? How do you engage with the consumer? How do you really get the point across that there's something interesting to offer here? And I'll be really curious to see how that affects their advertising. It more than anything else, I think the biggest complaint I still have facing LG products is rarely the product itself. It's often how LG leads the discussion on what their phone has to offer. So you're going to pick up this phone and it's going to look kind of like a Samsung. It's going to look kind of like a Huawei. What makes it stand out? What sets it apart? And I'll be very curious to see if they can get ahead of that messaging rather than letting enthusiasts lead the discussion where they're going to, I feel, sort of do a disservice to what this phone might contribute. You know, like, well, it's kind of like this and it's kind of like that, but I really haven't used it because I like my Samsung, and then that's going to be the review.
Even if they contribute some sort of traditional advertising marketing campaign to all of this, they have very decent features in terms of just bringing on more sound, more media into the G7.
Brighter
more
screen
media
is a big deal. And I'll be curious, yes, can they sum that up in an ad? You know, like Apple will go out there and make a commercial for the iPhone on one feature. Something new, water resistance comes to the iPhone, and we get a killer commercial focused on just that. And I'm concerned and I'm doubtful that LG can carry part of that discussion, because that's a delineating feature. The headphone jack is going to be a delineating feature. Those things matter to consumers in their daily usage of the phone, but are we just going to see a bunch of feel-good millennial aspirational commercials like do what you can't do because it's so passionate and your youth culture young? And if that's what we see, then LG is going to fail because they can't out Samsung there. Samsung can come up with all of this feel goody advertising because they spend over $1 billion a year just on advertising alone. If LG even scratched that quantity of advertising, I don't think we'd be having this kind of conversation of them having difficulties reaching some of their consumers.
I mean, it's already different. Yeah, go ahead.
To that point, though, it's, you know, Samsung is so far ahead and Apple is so far ahead, and LG, their phone isn't that dramatically different from last year's phone, as Samsung's phone isn't dramatically different from last year's phone. But the level at which they start is dramatically different. Like, the design of the Galaxy S8 was dramatically better than that of the G6. And so if you start on the same, not the same playing field, but similar playing fields, and saying, okay, we're going 2 steps up. Samsung's 2 steps up is, you know, 15 rungs up, but LG's 2 steps up is 7.
I don't know. I don't know that I'd completely agree with that disparity. I mean, I think
no, it's not that far of a disparity. But when you look at something that has a lot of appeal from a visual standpoint, even though, you know, Samsung's phone didn't look a lot different this year, right. LG's just took, you know, a slightly different turn, and it honestly, I think it doesn't look as good as last year's device. And for me, that's a step in the wrong direction. They need to make it look better.
One of the things that I think is kind of curious is when we look at some of their design influence on the last generation, the V30. The V30, I think, beat Apple to the iPhone 10 with a better version of what that design language could look like. But we still didn't see LG give that phone the push where it could have been put up in carrier stores. It could have been on Best Buy kiosks, and it could have been shown off in ads outside of the Olympics. We saw some commercials for it with the Olympics where you had a bunch of really young people talking to camera, and then the phone would kind of pop up at the end of the commercial. Yeah. Those types of things. That's also why, because to your point, one of the things that LG as a brand, I think, is most sensitive about would be things like QA, consistency of manufacturing, some of their back-end support when consumers have problems. But that's absolutely why I think they should be focused on differentiators, right? So given that there is a perception of Samsung being so much further ahead than the rest of the Android marketplace, how do you close that gap? You don't close that gap by talking about your phone in a general all-rounder sense, you say objectively, without debate, without, there is no question, we have the best headphone audio on any device that you can put in your pocket. You make an entire commercial just about that. And that sets up a certain idea in consumers' minds. I think that's some of the stuff that worked for the G4. Like that year, I would say Samsung probably had the better all-rounder phone, but the camera experience on the G4 was a step ahead of what everyone else was doing outside of like Windows Phone for the time. And how do you recapture some of that conversation today? It's not by, putting out, like, limping into the market in May, quietly sort of handing this phone over to reviewers, because we don't have the power to expose general consumers to this stuff like we did 10 years ago. And then because this is also the big fear, is LG going to be absent from the conversation for 6 weeks, 2 months, while we wait to see where this phone is actually going to ship? Well, they announced it.
We're bringing all these tangents out. Yeah, we're bringing all these tangents out to HTC, which has had pretty much the same issues in terms of getting the word out, in terms of making sure that people know the features that they have to offer. And, well, carrier situation, obviously, we're at a point where LG is the fourth biggest manufacturer in the United States in terms of smartphones. It's just, well, I'm not sure that they had the reach, but most of that reach is in the prepaid market, where they're having like these Ks and Vs or like the little tiny things, and not the main Gs and Vs. So they still already have a very low base in terms of their flagship usership, and it's just they're not working. It's not working for them.
Well, and I think it comes down to LG really doesn't have a strategy that they're trying to deliver. If you look at Samsung, there's a clear, beaten down path that they are going after people who are willing to spend a lot of money on their devices. They're going after Apple. They're going after the high end of the market. And as you said, most of the devices that are sold in the US are these cheaper LG phones. So even though they're number 4 in the US, that doesn't mean that people are walking into any of the carrier stores and saying, I want the newest LG phone. It's what's the cheapest phone I can buy.
Sorry to jump in on that. That's actually one of the things that I wanted to get your opinion on. So much of the American market is built on this carrier relationship. Mm-hmm. And do we think that LG can make a name for this product in North America when it's looking like AT&T is probably just going to pass on this phone entirely and follow up with LG, depending on what they do with a future V series phone closer to the end of summer, or closer to the end of the year, maybe around the iPhone launch? How do you think that affects the consumer conversation when you don't one of the most primary resources we have is walking into a carrier store, seeing the displays, and poking at the phones there? I think that's how a lot of people are educated about what their options are. And now here's the second largest carrier just walking away.
Well, and that's the thing here in the US. I would say, I don't have the numbers, but I would say 90% of smartphones are still purchased through your service provider store or website, which is really a sad thing, because there are so many other options out there that aren't available through those outlets that it's practically, like you're shooting yourself in the foot if you want something that's different from anyone else. And that's how it is in Europe. You just go anywhere, you buy your phone. Very few people actually go into their service provider's store to buy their device. They go to a general consumer electronic retailer like Best Buy, or just a corner shop. Like, everybody's selling smartphones everywhere. Like, every time you guys have been over to Europe, it's, the market's completely different, and your service provider doesn't dictate what you use. And here in the States, even though you can buy unlocked devices now, every device is bought without, a 2-year contract, unless you're doing those payment plans. Even though that's the case, everyone's still relying on their service provider and having them dictate to them what they're going to buy. So AT&T customers can still buy the LG G7. They just need to go find it online, go to Amazon, go to LG's website and buy it. They just can't buy it from AT&T. And the sad part is that's going to have a big impact, because AT&T has
well, it cuts it out of
29% of U.S. customers, and 29% of U.S. customers aren't going to have the option. Well, they do have the option. They just will not know that they can buy something else.
Yeah, I think it's going to be exceedingly rare that AT&T customers are going to be walking around with this phone when it's not branded and on a carrier shelf.
Especially with the future strategies going forward, and we've seen leaks today of an AT&T branded V35 ThinQ that is going to be on the network supposedly in the summer. And then there's the question of whether it will carry the V40 as well. Like this kind of interruption in the release.
Well, and this
sense.
Oh, sorry, Jules.
No, go ahead. Yeah, no,
I had a little dropout right there too. Oh, the joys of trying to have a conversation on Hangouts. This is what I'm really curious for you guys too. Is the timing on this phone is so awkward. What do you guys think this is gonna mean for a launch strategy on a next gen V? Because we're still overlapping the V35. This phone already feels like a lot of what we would see in a V40. You know, again, they're bridging the G and the V series. They're getting closer and closer and closer to each other on every strategy. Could this just mean like they're going to go with a bigger screen and a slightly larger battery, and then that's going to be what the V40 is? Or do you think that we're going to see a bigger change, more substantial change for their next major phablet entry into this market?
I mean, I've never been a huge fan of the V series besides for the camera capabilities. I don't think that there's much that they can do. I mean, this phone's coming out so late in the market, or so late in the year, that you have essentially 3 to 4 months before the V device is supposed to drop. And that's not enough time to get something that's substantially different or substantially better than this. I mean, looking at the specs, the G7 is top of the line device. The only thing that's really missing is a real selling point as to why you should buy this over any other phone that has the same specs. For me, that only selling point is the wide angle camera. I love the wide angle camera that these phones have. And LG has been, honestly, I think they're the only ones that have the second camera that has the wider lens when everyone else is going to the 2x telephoto zoom. And I think it offers an experience that you can't get anywhere else. And if they can find a way to make that better on the next V series, offer something different, maybe copy what, Huawei's doing, add a third sensor on there, another lens, and, give the wide angle, the ultra wide, and then a telephoto. Who knows?
I still think that there's an opportunity to talk about sound. I mean, we're hearing those rumors that the next, iPhone isn't even going to have a headphone dongle in the box. Yeah. And yet here's LG sporting a really high quality, competitive against some of my favorite portable, high quality audio player chipsets.
Hundreds of dollars.
It's a huge opportunity that I think they're just throwing away. So many people walk around with headphones in their ears all day. Don't you deserve the best? If you're listening to audio all day long,
best for your ears.
Don't your ears deserve the luxury?
196 kilohertz. And also,
I'm trying to write commercials for them right now while we're doing the podcast. This is for our tap out moment.
Well, for the sake of the ThinQ branding, I'm pretty happy that they're sticking with Google Assistant. I'm not sure it was still about this whole hardware key situation where you have to press the button in order to get the thing, and it's just and that's your only option for the button. You can't.
Our listeners have heard me get way too cranky about this, especially with the Bixby button. What are your thoughts on AI assistants in general? Like, were you not using your assistant because you didn't have a button to click to use your assistant?
I use Google Assistant all the time. I just did a video for my own YouTube channel of top 10 tips for the Galaxy S9. And tip number 1, how to disable Bixby.
The hottest tip, most views.
But don't you think, like especially now that we've been training consumers on smart speakers, that the killer app is going to be voice controls, not not a tactile button, which is confused with a power button on your fingertips because these things are so.
Well, that's also coming to the super far field mic recognition that they'll put on. Apparently, they're going to treat it like a smart speaker or something. So, I mean, they're tackling it from both angles, but I don't know. It's one be the better one, and the other one just shove it to the side.
I don't know. Like as far as like a dedicated button for it, I'm not a fan. I mean, if a voice assistant is supposed to be a voice assistant, you should be activating it with your voice as well. I use the Pixel 2 as my main device, and it stole the squeeze functionality from the HTC U11, and I don't know. I never used the squeeze functionality ever. I used it on the U11 because I could reprogram it to something else, but I do not use it for my Google Assistant.
Yeah, my phone spends so much time in a car cradle. Yeah. Like reaching up to push a button or squeeze the phone when it's already being clamped. doesn't have any appeal to me.
You got to raise that power threshold and whatnot. A couple more comments from the YouTube chat here. Ulysses Ramirez. G7 is behind because the marketing from, say, Samsung or Apple is 10 times more prevalent and therefore more known. And just a whole bunch of other comments. What most people don't understand is that just making a good device with great features isn't enough. You need great marketing skill and, above all, good after-sales service, where Samsung and Apple excel, from Roshan Shashane. So keep those comments coming in. We'll be continuing to read those throughout the show. And by the way, I should correct myself here. Boombox speaker is still the mono bottom firing thing. I apologize for mentioning that it was front firing. It was actually bottom firing. So we'll take that into mind. Maybe that will affect your decisions, but it's still louder. I don't know. We'll move on from that, though. We'll have more to talk about in the reviews and whatnot. Let's talk about the news here. We're going to go one by one in sort of a quick fire fashion. I'm just going to introduce, I'm going to set up the story. One of you can pass on over to another person, and then we'll spike it over the net, and then we'll score. Well, I think that's how it works.
Really Top Gun of you, Jules. I don't.
Dead or alive volleyball, definitely.
No, you do not want to see jiggle physics on my current form.
On our news coverage.
But I'm definitely rocking a dad bod right now. So
yeah, there we go. Let's start off with the LG Watch timepiece, which is supposedly one of the first LG watch that will be featuring Wear OS. Last year we had a couple of Android Wear, and then we had the branding change. So this apparently will be a model that will fit between the LG Watch Sport and LG Watch Style. A lot of the same specs, but just a better display by a little bit, better RAM, and it will have the ability to be a hybrid smartwatch, being that it has a mechanical watch face, so you can keep time. And then there's obviously the screen for the smart stuff. Now, supposedly this was supposed to be a release that was set for this week, but apparently we just haven't seen anything about this. So in regards to all that, Nick, where do you think Wear OS is at this point?
I think Wear OS is desperately lost, which makes me really sad. I'm a big fan of smartwatches. I've used them for years. I still have my Pebble. I just think Google needs to have a clear picture as to what the development for this category is and where they want to take it. I don't necessarily think we should need a Pixel watch to kind of define that, but if everyone else seems lost along the way and doesn't know how to bring something new to the table, maybe at this point we should just all give up.
Like, I mean, this doesn't even feel like a Nexus kind of project. No. That, yeah, Juan Carlos has something to say with his nose.
Oh no, I'm just agreeing wholeheartedly. I've been so cranky about Wear OS and the recent changes that like notifications have gotten worse, performance has gotten worse, phone connectivity has gotten worse. This is we've taken so many steps backwards from the Pebble that I would be recommending an iOS strategy for people who were really thinking that a smartwatch would be a good fit for them. Or I mean, I guess a close second would be Tizen, Get yourself a Galaxy phone, get yourself a Gear smartwatch. And I think it's too fiddly, but it's better supported, better iterated, and better hardwared than what you currently get in Wear OS land at the moment.
And so just to let you guys know, my brother came to me asking for smartwatch recommendations, and he's not a smartwatch kind of guy. And he was saying, oh, I want notifications. I want this. I want that. And I was like, no, I honestly, right now, what I would recommend is a hybrid smartwatch. Get a Withings, you know, something like that, or any of the Fossil smartwatches that just vibrate and count your steps throughout the day. Yeah, exactly. It's beautiful. It looks like a watch, which I love watches.
I love
and it does the basic things that you need. You know, no one needs to read a text message. I mean, if you do, that's fine. But, you know, for 99% of the people, I think the hybrid smartwatches are.
Yeah,
well, one thing especially opposite watch fans, where I don't have to charge that every night.
Yeah.
Indeed.
That's the crazy part. That's why I use my Pebble.
Yep. One thing I'm glad this week also from the news is that Nokia sold Withings back to its original co-founder.
Let's play ping pong with health gadgets. It's so terrible.
Yeah, it sucks, but no. Again, Nokia is trying to consolidate. I think it's to battle against Qualcomm and whatnot in its weakened state. But in terms of that, at least they didn't pull a Microsoft and basically just took a whole bunch of people from Espoo and Tallinn and then dumped them into the unemployment line after a year.
Not too far though. I mean, the market does not respond well to that kind of unsureness, insecurity. You know, what label, what brand. The Nokia name still has a ton of respect, but then they're dumping this whole division. Withings didn't have quite the same visibility, so it's not as bad as Microsoft. What happened with
not at all,
but
not
it's still like, this is not a good look for this market. You know, if a company like Nokia and Withings working together can't inspire some consumer traction on health fitness gadgets, something that should be blowing up right now, then that's a scary idea, I think, for the entire market, the entire segment.
Not on your wrist, though. Don't have it blow up on your wrist, because that would be bad. Let's move on to Red, the camera company that makes those fancy schmancy 4K, 8K, 12K cameras that cinematographers use. And let's talk about the Hydrogen One for a second there. First, Android smartphone that they have absolutely no idea whatsoever what we are doing in terms of developing. That's from coming from Jim Gennard, who runs Red, and has had to announce a further delay. First, it was going to be Q1 of this year. Now it's going to, and then it was summer, and now it's going to be, we're pushing late August. We're pushing that fall barrier here, and all this is to well, first of all, is to incorporate a 4-view camera function in the base device, because we're talking about this modular setup here that is supposed to be able to record holographic images via the 4-view recording method. They acquired some technology from a company called Leia. Speaking of Star Wars, Leia, and that's great, but also in showing off Jim Gennard's greenness to this industry, he also hopes to hit up a few carriers and make sure that there's a simultaneous release. Now, I'm not sure if maybe he's hoping to get this all international and maybe just achieve one carrier on each country, or maybe he's aiming for multiple carriers in each country. Like that process is pretty darn hard. So I mean it's all great for him. I have complete faith that he'll be able to serve his very niche population of very elite cinematographers in this. But I don't know, Juan Carlos, you have more Hollywood side perspective on this. What's your take?
Well, I think this is a misstep in over-promising and under-delivering. Red does not have any relationship or any reputation or any presence in smartphones. So that works for them in some regard, in that expectations can be managed that way. But I ultimately think it's going to hurt them in the long run, because you can't filter out updates to phones the same way that you work on Red as a camera system, with different modules, with different sensors, with different rails, with different battery packs, different things that you can add, augment, change, and develop that over time. And Red was a disruptor in that space for how little respect was given digital photography when they came out. Trying to do something like that in smartphones where we're at peak smartphone. I mean, think of the conversations we've been having about LG and HTC, and even to a lesser degree, Samsung and Apple. The smartphone hasn't changed a whole lot over the last couple generations of smartphone. We've reached peak smartphone. The act of picking up a glowing rectangle and pushing a square and getting an app is kind of about as good as we can make it with the current metaphor we use for data and services. So Red's walking into a mature market here, which I think is also going to be another strike against them if they come out with something that doesn't profoundly change how we interact with mobile content, with smartphone cameras, with multimedia. That's a completely different challenge, and I don't believe they've got the team and the resources to really join that challenge, to really meet that challenge.
And Nick, I'm going to pitch you up for the next story here with Samsung and Verizon partnering up with this crazy bloatware kind of a deal going on. So Verizon's Oath subsidiary, which runs all of its media properties such as Yahoo Sports and Yahoo News and Go90 or whatever, they basically teamed up so that Oath assets are now providing content for Bixby Home on the Galaxy S9, Galaxy S9 Plus, and all this content is going to be coming in, just stories on the feed and also in pre-installed apps with Verizon. So how much hate can we put on this? Or excuse me, pre-installed on just Galaxy S9. I just wanted to make clear.
I don't think there should be that much hate installed on it. Like if you look at the breadth of the content that's available through Oath, I know we like to hate on it because it's owned by Verizon, but when it was on its own, it's a good source of content. I mean, you look at all the outlets that are listed under it, but then again, I don't like Bixby. I can tell you, I can show you how to disable Bixby Home on your Android, on your Samsung Galaxy.
If only there was a video that we could reference.
If there was only a video. But I mean,
YouTube.com/high-tech traveler.
I every time that I open Bixby Home is by accident. And I don't think that there is a substantial number of people who open Bixby Home on purpose to go find content that's available on Bixby Home. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Have either of you ever opened up Bixby Home to find something useful there?
No, the only times I've used Bixby is when I need to show it off in a review. And there are so many good ideas in there, especially like creating macros. I think some of that stuff is cool. But again, smartphones do what they do. And I haven't been won over that this is a new way for me to use my phone.
Yeah.
What's a Galaxy S9? I've never held it. Actually, I have, but I don't own one. So.
But more, do we have concerns again, with a company like Verizon leveraging their content, their multimedia? At what point do we get to say as consumers that we have control over the ridiculously expensive pocket computers that we purchase? You know, when even on every now and then I'll run into an unlocked phone that had Facebook pre-installed and I can only disable it. I can't uninstall it. And on an unlocked phone, that's unacceptable. That is not okay. But now we've got these carrier branded experiments where because of the same thing, we can also make the same criticism of Samsung and Microsoft, where you go in, you get a Galaxy Note from a Microsoft store, and it's going to have a bunch of Microsoft apps and services pre-installed on it.
I mean,
who has control? Do you own your device?
I mean, yes, you do own your device. You can turn the feature off. You can not use it. My question is, though, like, is it exclusive content from Oath, or are they simply one of others who are feeding the news feeds and other things like that for Bixby Home? Because I don't think that was ever answered.
the premier content partner. Premier spelled as in the first. So I mean, it could be that there are more sources for more regional.
So I'm
outlets.
thinking that yes, you're going to get content from Oath and a lot of their properties, but it's not like they are the only ones, and it's not like CNN is now your only news channel ever. So I don't want to defend Verizon and their decisions, but I think a lot of people are overplaying this as something that's dramatically bad for people. Everyone pays money to get their content distributed. Verizon owns Oath. They're trying to get their content distributed. I mean, if Pocketnow had the money and could fill up Bixby Home with Pocketnow news, I'm sure we would too, right?
We totally have the marketing budget for that. Yeah, we certainly do, right? So yeah, it'd be an interesting query to watch for. We'll keep a watch on that for you. Let's talk about Qualcomm here, and I know this is kind of we're getting into the weeds somewhat, but I'll make it somewhat more simple, more interesting for you guys. So let's talk about licensing rates. The company just announced that they now have 2 patent bundles that they'll be selling to OEMs from now on, most OEMs at least. So they have the complete package of all the stuff that they have, all the IP for 5% of unit revenues. Or they have the standard essentials patents package, which basically covers their bread and butter, 3G, 4G connectivity, perhaps the cellular side of things. And that would be only for 3.25%. And this was all based off of settlements they had to make in China back a couple years ago. So we're talking about, they also lowered the cap too on how much of that license fee applies to the price of each phone. So it used to be the first $500 of a phone. Now it's going to be the first $400 of a phone. So what was basically, if you had a flagship phone from like 2017, you'd be paying $25 a piece just to get the Qualcomm stuff on it. And now maybe if you have a flagship phone but you just want the essentials, you'll be paying $13. But remember, Qualcomm is not just about modems. They're about a whole bunch of things. Audio codecs, for one, IoT, just a whole bunch of things. And with some of those features like AI, neural processing, and all that, those features are being included into more and more flagships as we go along in time. So is this a really make sense, a move that makes sense? Excuse me. If you were an OEM, what would be your strategy, Nick?
Well, I would love to know what the number was beforehand. I know they've kind of simplified it, but I think before they were actually charging even more, which seems kind of outrageous. So it's personally, I love the idea of you can patent an idea, you can make some money off of it, but I mean, Qualcomm, why should they get paid that much money for every smartphone that's made? And why is it off of a percentage of the price? Like, if it should be a set licensing fee, like you have a phone that has a 3G, 4G, 5G modem, and we get $10 for that. It shouldn't be, oh, because your phone sells for X amount of dollars, we make more money off of it. Those percentages, like from a business standpoint, they make total sense for Qualcomm, but from a logic standpoint, like why?
Well, almost from a monopoly standpoint, they make sense for Qualcomm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why, I don't know, the US government and their stance on Huawei is so strict. Like Huawei does not use Qualcomm processors in their phones. They use their own processors, and Qualcomm doesn't get a dime from Huawei. Everyone else is paying up to Huawei, and it's
well, and it's frustrating because really? I feel it's frustrating because I think Qualcomm could be making a really disruptive move here, knowing the current state of Intel in this space. We for the desktop side, we've been seeing them struggle to break 10 nanometers on their more recent process shift. AMD is coming up, some heavy hitting gear. We've been seeing so many moves towards mobile chipsets starting to make their way into more desktop and laptop sphere products. Windows 10 on ARM is a perfect example of where Qualcomm could really hurt Intel in the mid-range, in the entry level in the mid-range, and they're not going to do it with this sort of halfway move. You know, same licensing structure, same deal, same collection of patents and technologies. So it's a little bit better. We'll see a little bit more traction. A few more manufacturers might take risks on a couple different products, but I don't think this is going to significantly move the needle on how companies are currently doing business with Qualcomm. I think Apple is still looking on how they can get out of any relationship with Qualcomm Tech.
Well, and I'd like to remind everybody that Qualcomm makes the majority of its money from licensing its patents. Even though its chips are the most popular chips in smartphones, you can't go anywhere without finding a smartphone that's powered by a Qualcomm chip. They make most of their money and probably 85% of their profits from patent licensing.
Although that number has been depressed with the ongoing lawsuits with Apple and
true. But just to put it in perspective, everyone's talking about their chips all the time, but that's not where Qualcomm makes its money at all. Like, they could shut down their chip business and still be a patent licensing business for the next 50 years and fire 95% of their workforce, and it would be a very successful company. And that's how much money and sway they have over the industry with their patents.
It's like the 1998 version of Godzilla, where there wasn't any talk about chips. It was all just about fish. Like, that's a lot of fish. Anyways, let's talk about Apple. Let's make the full pivot here. Apple released its earnings, and all in all, everyone seems a little surprised. They've been talking about the iPhone 10 being a disappointment with cut in parts orders and shipments and whatnot. And well, Tim Cook says no. iPhone 10 was the best seller week after week in the first quarter. And it seems like we have some proof of that. Strategy Analytics sees that within the first quarter this year, 16 million units shipped. And you combine that with the iPhone 8, iPhone 8 Plus, and even the iPhone 7, which take up the first 4 slots of their chart here. That's a pretty monstrous total where we have like 40 million just from those models alone. Now, it's a little surprising to me that they still got an average sales price of $728, which is only $28 more than an iPhone 8 base model price. So that's a little surprising to me, which like that stuff doesn't leave the mind like that. Like, it really makes me skeptical about what's going on here.
For me, it's always fun to see how analysts get things wrong. Quarter after quarter after quarter, especially when it comes to Apple. I'm just going to leave it at that. I mean, there's so many things that they could get right and get wrong, but every quarter, everyone's always surprised.
No, completely agree. It's hilarious watching people make significant stock moves on speculation about this company when we can't fault that they're a money-making juggernaut. And even for some of these phones maybe not performing like some people thought they should have, it doesn't mean that this company wasn't still making a ridiculously obscene amount of
money.
Purchase over purchase.
Indeed. And one of those people that was making money off of every move that Apple made or supposedly made or may have made was KGI Securities Apple's to Apple's analyst Ming-Chi Kuo, who has left the firm to pursue ventures perhaps in China, perhaps in other fields. So what do you say? Goodbye, good riddance, good luck?
Yeah, don't care.
Bye.
I don't.
All right, let's move on.
I'm working really hard to try and have an opinion on this, and it's just not happening.
Everyone made a big deal that, like, all the Apple like columns are like, oh, Ming-Chi Kuo, he's such a visionary, and he has all these great access points and whatnot, and yeah, it's not really good. You know, conversation piece is not really the thing here, but hey, I mean, maybe Renee Ritchie would make a big point about it. I don't know. Let's talk about Xiaomi here. We have a couple of big debate topics, and apparently topics that Nick Gray here, our friend, has contributed editorials to on Pocketnow.com. If you have the rundown handy, and if not, well, you can just click on to Pocketnow.com. Podcast section should have the links for you over there. Let's talk about Xiaomi, though. This week, they launched into an IPO. They put the papers in Hong Kong. Supposedly, it's going to be $10 billion. They're going to be valued near or at $100 billion, which would be big for them. They're expanding into Europe with a new partnership, the 3 network, and they have more Android One phones that are being planned out. So all this is being in the context that they're going to have 100 million smartphone shipments this year, they say, and that they're going to reach the US either late this year or early next. So what is the tackle that you're taking here, Nick, in terms of what you're saying?
For me, it's people don't realize that Xiaomi is just not a smartphone maker. I mean, originally you could easily compare them to an HTC, Oppo, and some other manufacturers that just push out smartphones. But the company's expanded so much over the last couple of years. If you go to their website, they have close to 900 or more different products that they sell. And to be fair, they don't manufacture all those products. Actually, Xiaomi doesn't manufacture any of their own products, but they partner with smaller Chinese brands and rebrand their products to put Xiaomi on them and then push them out the door. But their breadth of devices and categories that they cover is just astounding. And Xiaomi moving into Europe and possibly the US actually means we get more than just smartphones. We get everything. Like, they make drones, they make webcams, they make mirrorless cameras, they make electric scooters, electric bikes, pretty much anything that has to do with technology. And their real goal is to take on the bigger players like Samsung and LG and not just be secluded to the smartphone space.
And you're also making the good point here that they've partnered with big retailers too. It's not just carriers. They're talking about Fortress, big chain in Asia and Europe, Superdrug, Quidvat, and CK Hutchison as well. So definitely in terms of getting not just phones, but also all those products, be it, air purifiers or whatnot, that's pretty important as well.
Well, and you're not just going to, a company announces that they're coming to a specific market, and all they really do is flip the switch on the domain name and say, hey, you can buy things from our website now. No, they're actually doing a retail push. And for some of you who don't know, Xiaomi actually has retail stores of their own. They opened a store in Barcelona late last year. They're working on a store that's going to be opening up in Paris, I believe, next month. And so and a lot of their stores are pseudo Apple stores. The feeling that you get when you walk inside is like you walked into an Apple store. But it's one of those things where it's a manufacturer that's trying to enter a new market, but that manufacturer isn't looking for ridiculously high profit margins like an Apple or a Samsung. When they announced the phone last week, their CEO went up on stage and promised that they're capping their profits after tax at 5%, which is ridiculously crazy when you think that Apple is making 45% profit on every single iPhone that it sells. Xiaomi is doing the same thing, only asking for 5% profit.
Well, and of course, taxes and operating expenses and whatnot. It's already a hard business to be in. But especially now, when they filed their IPO, they have a lot of investors backing into them, and they have more of a profit motive to serve. And especially considering that these are Western banks, not Chinese banks at all. Western banks that have the capitalist mind of just being able to just go at it and make sure that they make these certain margins. So they're walking a difficult tightrope here. And we had a couple of its co-founders leave the company just before this IPO was filed. So all I'm saying right here is that the road ahead for them is going to be even more difficult. They're going to have to battle growth and their mission, what they are as just a basic brand. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm not sure
Yes,
if
it
they're
will.
frozen.
Silence.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that things were not frozen, because there was a moment there where I was like, oh, everything is not. There's silence.
The only thing I have to add to this, because I mean, we've got a couple. There are stories about, will we see new Android One phones on the rundown? What the global strategies are looking like? They want to ship 100 million smartphones in 2018. But to Nick's overall point, again, I really want to stress to people the waning power of the smartphone over a lot of these manufacturers. Xiaomi is looking at being a full-on lifestyle gadget consumer electronics brand. It's not hinged completely on these smartphone sales. And when we criticize a company like LG, for example, they have an entire portfolio of products outside the realm of the smartphone. And I feel like for a lot of these manufacturers, the smartphone is becoming a less and less desirable companion device for some of these other money makers, appliances, kitchen tech, stuff like
from Superstar Fresh here on the YouTube chat. Xiaomi makes one awesome Android skin. I'll give them that. And they're also expanding into services as well. That's where they've been running ads and making most of their money too. So it's
well, and
I'll be curious.
One of the things I'd like to remind people, though, how the company got started was their Android skin. Yeah. The MIUI was how they got started. They started with software. I think it was 2.5, 3 years before they released their first phone. Mm-hmm. And people were on XDA developers flashing MIUI to, I flashed it to my G2, way back in the day. And I mean, they're really good at software. Yes, it's not pure stock Android, but they had a lot of ideas that are now part of the base version of Android that they implemented 2 to 3 years before Google did. So keep that in mind. And also,
at the same time, they are making noise. There are the rumors about them joining forces on Android One. So not only are they really savvy at creating their own software, I think they're recognizing the potential of, well, there are going to be a certain class of consumers who are going to want this notion of purity.
They're recognizing the world outside of China that wants that.
I think Jules froze.
Freezing.
Oh boy, this is such a great show. I was looking forward to it. It was very well produced, and everything was just like. Ew.
Before we completely lose connection, and I think Nick, you'll probably need to be going soon. We should probably talk out Sprint and T-Mobile. Probably one of the most well-joined and aggressive conversations I think I've ever been included on Twitter was this debate over competition in a marketplace, mergers and acquisitions resulting in job loss. A lot of people had very passionate and very lengthy replies to be joined, which of course Twitter is the best platform to have these kinds of in-depth and nuanced conversations. But
at least now your tweets can be a little bit longer.
Well, then also it was crazy trying to follow the thread of this debate between 5 or 6 larger, like Jaime Rivera and Mr. Mobile all having this conversation together. But then you would see people replying with those stacked tweets. Yeah. You can make a chain of tweets now, and then someone would reply to tweet 3 of this chain, and this is impossible. I can't even
follow it anymore.
I can't even follow it. But I just wanted to get your thoughts, Nick. T-Mobile and Sprint, 3rd and 4th place carriers respectively, joining forces, becoming a 3-tier media landscape for most American consumers in the smartphone space. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings on this? The pros and cons of these 2 joining forces.
As a business major and having worked in the corporate world for years, I would say that losing a competitor is one of the worst things for the marketplace. It's, consumers should be worried, prices will go up. But then you look at what T-Mobile has done over the last 3 to 4 years and forced the other carriers to submit to their demands by offering unlimited data, bundling other services with, the basic plans, cutting out you know, cutting down prices, including taxes and what you're actually paying, rather than saying you're paying $40 plus taxes. You know, $40 is, you know, exactly what you're going to be paying.
And this wasn't coming from Deutsche Telekom. This was coming from one person they hired.
This was coming from John Ledger. I mean, he wanted to disrupt the industry like no one did. And honestly, I think if this merger goes through, he will be emboldened to take it further. I mean, I'm a T-Mobile customer. I've been a T-Mobile customer since, I don't know, at least a decade. And I've always liked rooting for the little guy. You know, T-Mobile wasn't, you know, the best service that you could get. They didn't have the best phones ever, but they always offered something unique. And I don't think that's going to change if T-Mobile and Sprint merge. I think the company's going to be emboldened, and they'll still be the smallest of the three carriers. They'll be a couple million behind AT&T and, you know, maybe 8 or 9 million behind Verizon. But if at that point you just got, you know, you moved up the scale and eliminated your smaller competitor, essentially, I think if you're that close to the top, I would say they're going to push to be number one, and that's going to mean more disruption in the industry.
In terms of YouTube chat, Dudameng Brozovic, nice name there, talking about their network technologies, CDMA and GSM combining, amazing. Also, isn't Google Fi based on both Sprint and T-Mobile networks? Well, Google Fi, correct. But it uses both, as well as US Cellular, and they have a whole bunch of other partners. But more than that, CDMA and GSM, T-Mobile had to go through that transition too back in 2012 when it acquired Metro PCS. They had CDMA grid that they shut it down. And turned.
I would imagine Sprint towers will soon be cannibalized for 5G and T-Mobile.
Oh yeah, totally. And like they'll be equipping some of the old. It'll be mostly T-Mobile, but they'll be equipping some of the old Sprint towers with proper radios as well for T-Mobile usage.
Proper radios, I like that.
Proper radios. That's Sprint cheap radios. So like, there's definitely a good shift, and pure LTE is coming soon. So that's something that we can all look forward to. One of the concerns that people have been continually bringing up is that with this lack of competition, or less competition, there is less of an incentive to price low. Sprint and T-Mobile have been the cut rate competitors here, but in the end, they've been trying to target AT&T and Verizon customers who have been paying high prices. I don't see too much of an incentive to raise prices at this point, and at least for the short term. There is some concern about prepaid, because between their brands, Metro PCS, Boost Mobile, Virgin Mobile, they own 54% of the market. And that would be something of concern if the Department of Justice looks at this and says, okay, should we treat postpaid and prepaid as separate things? And if so, what are you going to do about this prepaid situation right now? Because from what we've heard from the company, they want to keep postpaid and prepaid all together. So this is going to be interesting. And if they raise prices on prepaid, where, you know, the majority of households make less than $75,000 a year, where do they go? And where do MVNOs go? Because a lot of those carriers buy wholesale access from Sprint or T-Mobile because they are the most affordable offerers of that. The ripple effects here are quite wide.
Like, Nick, your perspective on this, I think, would be appreciated too, because when we're talking about the big three, I completely agree with your assessment that we'll probably see T-Mobile aggressively trying to take down AT&T. Being the number one, I think, would be a huge coup for them. But how far should we be taking our concerns on MVNOs, the prepaid market? You know, an outlet like Freedom Pop, where 2 million of their subscribers are making less than $40,000 a year, something where we've kind of democratized cell phone usage through leasing air on these major networks, but for smaller players to be able to compete via price.
You know, I've used MVNOs over the years, and you know, you always get almost the exact service you would get from the regular service providers. You know, you have slightly slower data, but you get the better prices, and that's always the appeal of going with an MVNO rather than, you know, an AT&T, T-Mobile, or Sprint, or Verizon. But I don't think that MVNOs will be going away anytime soon, or the pricing for MVNOs is going to go up. The benefit that, you know, T-Mobile, Sprint, and anyone else has from leasing their spectrum out to these MVNOs is that they're getting customers, they're getting paid, and they're not doing any work. It's essentially free money for having somebody live in your basement for a basement that you don't work, or a basement that you don't use.
From the carrier perspective, like I don't think they would want to do anything to disrupt that model. But what I'm concerned about is the regulatory perspective. You know, so someone who's looking from the outside of this business deal and sees these two companies occupy over half of this this prepaid market, is that something that should give investors pause over really trying to push this merger through? Like, should we be concerned that this could be the hang up which might slow down Sprint and T-Mobile joining forces?
I don't. I mean, from a regulatory perspective, I don't think that's going to be a big issue at all. I mean, the only reason why the MVNOs are going on Sprint and T-Mobile's networks is because they're offering the better rates. It's not that they have a competitive advantage over Verizon or AT&T. I mean, they might from an infrastructure back end, because they've worked with MVNOs so much over the last couple of years that they have a better setup for it. But the only reason for that is that they've been more competitive. So if anything, if Verizon and AT&T want to get more into that game, we might see more competition and even, you know, a broadening of that MVNO marketplace because of that. Because now it puts, you know, as you said, that big chunk of that MVNO clientele straight on the new T-Mobile, and Verizon and AT&T just don't have anything to compete with that.
Indeed. So a couple more comments from PN Weekly hashtag here. And they're both from David Batista da Silva here. Xiaomi is already in Europe. They have brand stores even, which we've made the point of. But again, they're kind of expanding a little slower than what a retail partnership would do. So just because the UK and Germany were rid of them doesn't mean they weren't around. Europe is a continent with a ton of countries, you know. And then with this more partner comment to Sprint T-Mobile, the sooner Verizon is left as the only CDMA network, the better for Americans. They'll then eventually have to upgrade to GSM like the rest of the world. That's quite the comment you're making about upgrades here.
Don't forget Korea.
Don't forget Korea.
They are CDMA.
As OEMs will be less and less likely to be willing to waste money putting CDMA on phones, or even chipset manufacturers putting CDMA on phones. But again, we're LTE, pure LTE. Like, come on, people, and especially with 5G, which is going to be backwards compatible.
With Jules flipping out about CDMA and different wireless technologies, we should probably start.
What is this, 2005 again? Why are we talking about this?
Like,
hey guys, have you heard of this new technology called WiMAX?
WiMAX, yeah.
It's taking the world by storm. It's the way of the future. I got like a 10
Evo
megabit
4G, man.
It was all about my Epic. We should probably put a pin in it. Nick, where can people follow your exploits? You're doing some crazy lifestyle technology experimentation, and where can people find more information on your exploits?
A little bit everywhere. As Juan said, I am doing something weird and strange. I'm living full time in a 30-foot travel trailer, traveling the country. At the same time, trying to grow my YouTube channel, High Tech Traveler, if you want to check that out. But best way to follow me is typically on Twitter, or to get a hold of me at Nick M. Gray. But I've also been doing some editorial content here at Pocketnow. So I typically have 2 articles coming up every week. If you haven't seen them, click over on the editorial tab up top and let me know what you think. Leave me a comment. Argue with me.
Come at me, bro.
Put on those dukes. Put on those dukes.
Well, thank you for joining us on the show, and we definitely have to have you back on soon. And one of the things I definitely want to talk to you about, especially in Pocketnow's mission, are some of the successes and some of the failures of you hitting the road and utilizing and using some of this gear. We talk about it so hypothetically that I think it would be nice to shine a light on, man, this is what it really looks like when we rely on this stuff above and beyond. So we definitely have to have you back on soon.
Definitely. Looking forward to it.
Definitely. So, folks, there you have it. Another episode of the Pocketnow Weekly has come and gone. This show is over, but the conversation continues on Twitter. Once again, Nick is at Nick M. Gray. Jules is at Point Jules, and I'm humbly at Some Gadget Guy. Pocketnow is around the web, all over the socials, the YouTubes, and our home site, pocketnow.com. If you're speaking the Spanish, you need to check out es.pocketnow.com. Shows like this cannot exist without your support. Sharing the weekly with your friends who love mobile technology and dropping reviews on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you can review podcasts. Once again, we want to thank this week's sponsor, Stitcher Premium. They're helping us keep the lights on, but ultimately there would not be a show if it weren't for our listeners and subscribers who have kept us on the air since 2012. The Pocketnow Weekly will be back next week with all kinds of delicious technology goodness, so make sure you tune back in.